Okay, I think we have enough people on that we'll go ahead and get started. Again, welcome and good evening to everyone who's joining us. I just want to personally thank everyone who's joining us this evening, to our virtual and to our live attendees. Welcome. If you're new here, I just want to say we're really happy to have you. And if you're returning, we're happy to have you back. Founded in early 2024, the Endodontic Study Club is dedicated to building a strong endodontic community while providing meaningful peer-led education on a monthly basis. As a reminder to everyone, we do meet the third Wednesday of each month. We have a lot of really exciting topics to go over in 2026. So we hope if this is your first time here, it won't be your last. And we welcome you to join us next month. In the coming months, we have our series. So for this evening's webinar, we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. John Khademi and Sonendo's VP of Product Development, Kevin Yen. Just a little housekeeping. We want to go over of course, the webinar objectives. So let's quickly review what we're going to be going over. So we are going to be reviewing minimally invasive instrumentation protocols and sequences. We are going to discuss practical strategies for working in small and ultra small spaces. We're going to discuss obturation of small and ultra small canal spaces. And we're going to evaluate clinical outcomes using CleanFlow in small and ultra small spaces. So you are able to get CE 1.5 CE. So let's really quickly review how we do the CE process. For those who are joining us virtually, there will be an attendance that's recorded and audited for CE validation. For those who are here, we just need you to sign in the sign-in sheet. Make sure for those who are joining us from afar that your full name is visible in your Zoom profile. If it's not, just make sure to message us in the chat your full name. After this evening's lecture, you're going to get a survey. We really appreciate your feedback. And then after you fill out that survey, your CE cert will be sent via education@sonendo.com. So just a couple reminders. This is an interactive session. We really do encourage your Q&A and dedicated question and answer session at the end that we really look forward to. So as you have questions that come along on this session, please don't be afraid to enter them in the chat box. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kevin and John.
Thank you, Marina. First thing is thank you everyone for coming over here. I know it's right out of your day, out of your way, so I appreciate that. And obviously those online, thank you for your time. You know, this is somewhat personal. I think, John and I spend some good times together. And I think one thing that's really unique about what we have here at Sonendo with GenoWave is community, right? And I think just being able to get together, challenge each other, share thoughts. And everyone knows John likes a good challenge. And we might not agree on everything, but the one thing that we do agree on is we want to be better. And probably the other thing we can agree on is we both like motorcycles. Definitely community, challenge each other and be better. And that's why I love this guy. And I'm really excited to have him here. So what do we do here? Pretty straightforward, right? We want to get rid of everything in the red efficiently and effectively. That's our whole being. What we at Sonendo do is we just provide tools, right? You guys are the masters of the tools. So historically, we've always provided GenoWave, right? Next level clean. We have the G4, we have the CleanFlow. And it's something that, we've matured over time. What's exciting is that we're also providing another tool set, which is the FlowLogic rotary files. Those are something that we just launched a few months ago. And fundamentally, from our standpoint, we're not trying to create a new niche or anything like that, but we're really looking at, with GenoWave, we really can redefine the role of the file. And maybe more provocatively, with GenoWave, should it be called a file anymore? So that's really where we want to take this. Back in my days, this was kind of the thing that we always heard. You can have better, faster, cheaper, and you can only pick two. And that was what NASA always said. And I think Elon's probably proved them wrong. And I think that's really where we want to go to is I don't think we have to pick two. And really in our minds, in my mind, with GenoWave and with FlowLogic, we can probably have all three. And that's where we want to push to. So I think with that, I do want to not talk too much. John's got a lot of great stuff here. He's going to talk about how he's used GenoWave and how he's used FlowLogic files to achieve MIE. And I think more excitingly is not just have pretty white lines, but we actually have clinical follow-ups and a clinical trial associated
Skinny
with
white
it.
lines.
Skinny white lines, ultra skinny white lines. So with that, I'll let him take it from here.
Okay. The big question for endodontists and endodontics is, does MIE work? And we have 3 lines of evidence for that. We've got the surviving stream of cases, and those of you that have heard me talk about that before, the surviving stream of cases is evidence that smaller shapes and sizes really can and do work, and that the surviving stream is actually dominated by things that shouldn't work. And so really what the surviving stream of evidence does is it falsifies what endodontists think is necessary for outcome. We have clinical cases in private practice, the cases that I do, that Dale's done, that many of us have been doing a long time, and I'll show you some of those. And then we actually have our clinical trial data, CS35, that's the in-house name for the CleanFlow trial, that we're writing up the results for right now. And we'll see how far we get, because we've kind of pivoted this presentation to be more flow logic oriented. So we're going to talk about cases. Most of the stuff in terms of the techniques that we're talking about, in terms of access and shaping and instrumentation, most of those are covered in best practices. This is all pre-gentle wave, but the concepts are all pretty well laid out there that many of us have contributed to. So because I had to generate some new art for this stuff, we're actually going to look at cases from last Thursday, because we just got these files. So we've been using them for a couple of months. So this is all what we're going to call process outcomes. So I first saw Clara in 2001, and my associate Scott Weed treated this necrotic maxillary first molar. There's a CT. You can see there's in calcium hydroxide on that tooth, and he actually picked up the MB2 canal. You can see there's 2 canals obturated. This is 4 by F1 shapes in that tooth. This is 2011. Again, she was in 2021, and I saw her, and we did this necrotic lower second molar, and you can see that the shapes are already starting to look a little bit different there. This was a gentle wave case, VO3 in the mesials and 20 VO6, it's a little typo there, in the distals, and this was a gentle wave case, 1 step. And we saw her back last Thursday in 2026, and so of course we got to follow up on that lower molar, and you can see all the anatomy that we picked up in the mesial root at CBCT, but she came in this time for this maxillary second molar. And of course, in the process of imaging her for treatment, we got to that beautiful looking maxillary first molar in the intervening time. She was very lightly symptomatic on that tooth, but we all know where that tooth is going to be. Okay, so here's our maxillary first and second molar projection radiographs. Those are sent to me by the restorative dentist. Again, keep in mind, as good as that tooth looks, that's what it looks like at CT. Typically, what I'm doing from an instrumentation standpoint is I'm going to start with a 10-hand file, unless it's really calcified. Even then, I'm probably still going to pick up a 10-hand file. With some effort, almost always I can go straight to rotary files to full tone, and I go to full tone with gentle wave. So we've done that step here, and we're going to go do more in-depth cases later on in the presentation, the third case. But here, I've already got a 10-hand file down in the canals on this tooth, and then we're going to pick up the 1002 flow logic.
Palatal 18.5.
There's a palatal. You can see me bung it up a little bit. And the tactile feedback with these instruments, because the tips are so small.
1002. Palatal 18.5.
This is a 1002, full tone.
Good.
And you'll see me with the mirror, I'll do what's called a placement bend on it. So hook it in the canals. See the mirror? Put a little placement bend on it and into the distal buccal.
1502.
This is unedited, so you see it in real time how it's actually happening. Placement bend. That canal was 18, it's full tone. Another placement bend in the DB. DB's 18 as well. Little shake to get off the debris off the flutes. All the way down. Now we're going to go with the 2002.
And the 20.
That one's a little bit of a wobbler. That canal's 18 and a half. So 18 and a half, almost 19.
5.
Placement bend in the MB.
And then
That one didn't seem to want to go all the way down. That's okay. DB went pretty much all the way down.
that's it for rotaries.
That's it for rotary files. That's it, 2.5 minutes. The question sometimes comes up about RPMs and RPM usage. I don't have any problem with higher RPMs, but let's say that doubling your RPM halves the time that it takes for rotaries. Let's just say it does. That was 2.5 minutes, and you're going to risk that to save 1 minute and 15 seconds? Good luck. Okay, I'm fine with it, but I don't think it does what people think it does. I think it just increased the risks of problems and breakage. So that's it for rotaries. There's our access. So this is a tricks and tips kind of thing. We see the classic stepped access is described in best practices with the larger access through the restorative and then smaller access through the pericervical dentin. Got to check our matrix.
With these small accesses, you want to check fit the matrix. And
Matrix doesn't fit.
So
What do we do? Trim.
Trim the matrix down. My trim to be the same as the handle, so it'll be skinny in this way and fatter in that way. I use a diamond cylinder.
I'll go into the diamond and I'll knock the burrs off. So you can see that if the matrix is skinny one way and fat the other way. Truth be told, I don't do this. I have a stock of these that are set aside with little bands on them so I know which ones are which size. So just trim them, reuse them. They'll get a little bit sticky sometimes after you've used the matrix over a few times with the sound seal. Just Vaseline up the matrix and you're fine. So that's kind of what it looks like. This is a blurred shot, sorry. But you can see the outline is kind of that long, skinny, the same orientation as the access. So this is Clara, this is Thursday, and there's our post-op. That was 313 VO2s, and then the 20 VO2 just about 1 millimeter short on the MB. I think it went to length on the palatal and the DB. So they're very, very small shapes. So there we are. And we have a long history of innovation with Sun Endo, and the files were the thing that I wanted Sun Endo to finally do, to have a line of files. Kevin's going to talk about that later. Okay, next patient. So I first saw Lair in 2017, and this bridge was loose. And of course, 2017, I didn't have a console. So we went drop in, find the canals, take a CT in calcium hydroxide. Another calcium hydroxide visit, another calcium hydroxide visit. Finally, he's asymptomatic and we obturate the tooth. So this was actually at that time, this was 4/1704. This is pre-flow logic. SS Whites over 4 visits to get that tooth finally comfortable. There's the follow-up. Someone put an implant in there. I got him back and got a later follow-up, which you'll see. We saw him for this tooth in 2026. This necrotic maxillary molar. But I want to show you, we've been doing these small axes and small shapes because some of the evidence, 3 pieces of evidence, is cases from private practice. So these are these aren't like cherry pick cases. These are just cases from last Thursday.
So there's the MB, the DB, the palatal. And here's the size of our access. And what we'll really be telling is to put a pro taper over the access So here's a pro taper over the access. That's an F1 over the access. So good luck with that, John West.
So there's our tooth. We've got him back in 2026 for the contralateral upper first molar. And remember, that was 4 visits at a 1704. For all 4 canals were with that. This is 4 canals with a 1702 and a single visit in 2026. So I have enough confidence with GentleWave to now do what used to take 4 visits with these very small accesses and small shapes, to do those in a single visit with cases from the private practice. So we have those prior cases from them before, and the F1 tooth is broken. Diane. So she's new to me, necrotic mandibular molar. In this case, we're going to do basically start to finish all the way through. So the temptation is to start access on this through this zirconia crown. And I've got these zirconia diamonds here, but almost always, if you look closely in the microscope, you can see wear facets of these crowns that I think contribute to the pulp dyeing in these case types. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a football diamond in and knock off some of those wear facets. And if you've got wear facets in zirconia, you really got wear facets. So that's the temptation. So we're going to do that. This is this case from start to finish from an instrumentation standpoint. And I'm going to use my ball diamond until I get through the crown, where I can see either the dentin or the restorative substrate underneath the crown. So this is the start of what we used to call the stepped access, and now it's more of a funneled access because we've changed our technique just a little bit, which I'll show you. Then I'm going to take a football diamond and upright it and actually poke straight down with that football diamond to enlarge the access. Chair side is in there with the Stropco irrigator, watching where I'm cutting and keeping everything cool and keeping the diamond clear. And I'm only down just to the level of the dentin. We're not going down yet, we're going out.
So we've talked about the stepped access with minimally invasive, and this is more of like a cereal bowl. It slides in, it's not so abruptly stepped. I don't have a problem with the abruptly stepped accesses, but the football gives you this kind of cereal bowl access that still is quite preserving of the pericervical dentin.
And this is a key point with minimally invasive endodontics, is there's no principle of preservation of porcelain. There's no principle of preservation of zirconia. There's no principle of preservation of restorative material. So I'll see a tiny little hole, these so-called ninja accesses, and I'm fine if you want to do that. You're making your life more difficult. I'll cut a larger entrance through the restorative material and then step dent. So I'm basically just down to the level of the restorative material and or dent.
So now that we're basically down to dentin and restorative, we're through the crown, we're going to switch to a round-ended tapered diamond to make our access through to the pulp chamber.
Chair side in the scope. We're not out to the edge of the restorative material to the crown through the access to the crown. We've necked it down as we go through the pericervical dentin.
For the final bit of access, we're going to switch to an LA access, rounded the tapered diamond on our dry.
I'll do the final access into the tooth dry for better visibility. Having the chair side of the scope is indispensable. Dale?
Little pulp tissue right there.
this grooming. David Clark and I call this look, groom, follow. Look, groom, follow.
There's our MB.
There's the MB canal. Yep. Karen asked, is that a Stropco blowing air? It's an air-only Stropco when the chair side's running it. Yeah. That's how we find calcified canals. I had a chair side ask one time when I was giving a lecture, I was kidding around with her. I said, what's an Explorer for? And she said, I don't know, checking for anesthesia? She really didn't know that Explorer was for finding canals. Yeah, we found that canal without picking up the Explorer. ML. There we go. Pus coming up. Not a lot of people in the world get excited about pus coming up out of the tooth.
Stuck in there. Reorient to get the distals.
We're following the pulp tissue remnants.
That's the DL. Ish area. Moving to the DB.
And you can see the DL is kind of broad and oval shaped, which we all know.
Then I can clean the rest of it up with an LA access.
At this point, the case is mostly over.
No, I said clean that up with an LA access. I'm in an endo guide, so this is the EG2.
So in the very first case, you saw me fumbling around with that 1002 file where I dinged it on the palatal trying to get in the orifice and it curled over and I had to take it out and straighten it by hand. Your access needs to be really smooth here. And this is where the endoguide burrs can come in, or some short gates Glidden burrs can come in, is just getting that little smoothness to the access. Because you won't have tactile feel with these 10s and 15 files. They'll just curl over on you when you're getting them in the canal. So we're going to go with the endoguide and clean things up.
Hey, John. Yeah, there's a good question now, one that I've had too. When you've decided not to use water here, a couple of things. One, how do you prevent the zirconium from chipping? And can you tell if it's metal fused or just straight zirconium?
I don't think you can tell radiographically if it's straight zirc or PFZ unless there's a lot of porcelain on it. And if you remember in the very, very early on when we went through the zirconia, we used a ton of water. So that very initial step of getting through, that was a ton of water to get through. We clear out the zirconia so that we're not touching it on subsequent access steps, hence the larger access through the restorative material, and then stepping down and working dry inside of that smaller access.
Yes, that makes sense. Someone was saying you like to use dry to locate the calcified canals. Is that true?
Oh, yeah. Whether you just saw it. So that the typical routine will be get through the restorative material, cut a big access through the restorative material, neck down, go down some until the little hairs stand on the back of my neck, wet. There.
So now that we're basically down to
I'll get it, Wendy.
And restorative. We're through the crown.
Here we go.
We'll switch to a round-ended
taper diamond wet. Here comes the chair side with water. This is going to get us a good chunk of the rest of the way down. And then we're going to go dry.
For the final bit of access, we're going to switch to an LA access.
So that last little precise bit. That's what helps a little bit from dinging up the access too much on the way in.
No, I said clean that up with an LA access. I'm in an endo guide, so this is the EG2.
EG2 is a workhorse. You can really wrench on this thing.
And really, the EG2 you can really lean on.
This is going to knock stones off and denticles and chips along the wall and smoothing off. So it's easier to get your rotaries in.
Stone, we're kind of working through the stone. Now from the ML to the GL. There's a pulp tissue remnant there I can find, and then...
But the same principle, look, groom, follow.
The DB.
There comes a stone. You can see I'm really wrenching on that burr. It's really a tough burr. That stone's coming loose. Okay, length. My go-to is a 10 hand, just my routine. If you'd want to use an 8, that's fine. I find the 10 gives you the most stable readings. And if a straight 10 hand goes, case is over. The first big hurdle is finding the canals. The second big hurdle for me is getting the straight 10 hand file down. Once the straight 10 hand file's down, it's over. Love that sound. So MB looks like about 23.
23 from the MB.
22 and a half.
So if it's kind of tight, getting...
So Kevin brought this up earlier, that he saw me doing some push-pull filing. I've got the file in the canal already. If I've struggled getting that 10-hand file down, I'm going to do some push-pull filing, shorter length, but with a 10-hand file, you can stick it out the end of the tooth. Nothing's going to happen. But I'll do some push-pull filing to loosen that canal up a little bit so that I can go to rotaries more quickly. If the 10-hand file just kind of sails down, I don't bother doing that. But this one I had to work a little bit to get the 10-hand file down.
So if it's kind of tight, getting the 10 down, I'll do a little push-pull filing. That's going to help the rotary file go to length, and the 10 doesn't really transport. So I'm fine with that. So just getting this loosened up a little bit to follow with the 1002 path file. So I did some initial funneling with the endo guide burrs, but it's still a little raggedy getting in there with these small tip files. So I'm going to actually funnel a little bit more with
So I dorked it?
1004. It's a pretty small tipped instrument, and just kind of use that just to get a little more convenience for them for file placement. We're not trying to get it to length. And it's easy.
I can't tell you how tough these instruments are. I'm pushing on it. They're unbelievably tough instruments. So this is, again, just a little cheat for the endodontist to be able to get the rotary files in a little bit easier.
When you're using this file, are you using irrigants right now? Or what irrigants are you using?
There's irrigant in the tooth. There's bleach in the tooth, but I don't know that it matters. If you want to pick something else, that's fine. But this is not done dry.
It's already gone down to 20 in this 23 millimeter canal. So the canals were pretty big once I got in there.
Placement
bend on it. Hook it in the MB. Lift the handle so we have straight line access. And we're just funneling. I'm not really trying to create any shape in the tooth. I'm just trying to make it easier to get the small path files in there without dinging them up. DB. And suction out, Melissa.
I can't see the distal well enough to get the file in there, so she's going to go and suction it out.
Good.
So you can see I'm using wall pushing on it to try to get that just a little axis a little smoother. The time spent here pays dividends when you go to the smaller files.
Okay, so here's the 1002 path file. And we're just basically going to see if this hubs out. It's 23 and a half. If it goes longer, it doesn't matter. And you can see it's basically, that's a 24 right there. So I'm fine with that. That was first try in the ML. Placement bend into the MB. There's 22, 23, 24. First try. In the distal, there's DB. The DB's got a little curve on the end, so if it goes, great, and if not, that's okay too. So you just seem to quite want to go around that little distal hook. And here's the DL. Good.
So 1002, so I spent some time with that 10 hand file push-pull so that it was easier to get the these small rotaries in there. 1002 went down, bang, 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 all the canals.
So in my mind, no problem with using the flow logic 12s and 14s, but I find if the 10 goes, you can go right to the 17.
So the 10 went, this is 17?
Especially if the 10 goes easily, which it did, so there's the 17 down at to 20, basically 24. Placement bend, more placement bend into the MB.
That's a gold.
That hand.
So I was pushing on the patient moving. Yeah, they're so tough. So the question is when I went from the 10 to the 17, did I peck with them or did one smooth move? I'm using such a low RPM that pecking with these doesn't work. I find that they're more like 300 and 400 RPMs. And if you watch the stresses on the instrument, they just go through the roof when they're engaged. So I'm using a much lower RPM, about 100 to 150. And I'm just letting that file go, watching in the microscope. And when the file stops advancing, something's happening. Either the flutes are loaded up, it's encountered an obstacle. Hopefully that obstacle isn't the broken off tip of the file in there. These are so tough though. So I'll go in, and if you remember one of the earlier videos, and I pulled it back and I shook on the file a little bit with lubricant in the canal, bleach in the canal, that'll take some of the debris that's stuck on the flutes of the files. Because these files are so small, there's very little chip space in there and they load up quickly, especially if you're cutting with them. So I'm going to say it's a smooth move in, but it's not all the way down like this unless you just get lucky where it just kind of went down. So if it goes down some, a little bit, if I'm worried about it, I'll take it out and look at it. I'll shake the file off a little bit, put it back in the canal and let it go down and cut to length. But it's not a peck type of motion. These are O2s. Yeah, so the purple was the 1002 and the white was the 17. There's a 12 and a 14. I don't need them. If the 10 goes, the 17 goes, and then the 20 will almost always follow. And at that point, done. But good. There's two different ways of working with files. And this way is just the way I've learned to do it.
All right, that was someone having to itch his nose there. There we go. No problem. Back into the MB. That's a 24. That's a 17. These are just one pass. I'm just going right down. That's 23 or so.
So these are basically falling down the canal. Not quite, but they're kind of falling down the canal. I'm not having to work at it to get them to go down.
And the DB and the DL. Same. Put a little more irrigant in there. This is basically lubricant. I don't really even think of this as irrigant anymore.
So the 17's done.
Okay, and here's the 20 O2 path file into the ML. There's 22 ML length of this is 23.
ML is 23.
Yeah, so that's a 23 in that first try. Into the MB. Lift it. There's 22. 23. So the 10 hand file went, the 1002 followed, the 1702 followed, and then the 2002 followed. We did a little funneling with the 1004, but we're basically done with files.
Done with files. So that's the routine. For me, if 10 goes, easily the 1002 will follow. If the 1002 goes, the 15 or 17 will follow. And if the 17 goes, the 20 will usually follow, but I don't really care if the 20 goes down all the way. It's not that big of a difference on those. All right, now the hard part. Check your matrix. That goes, that's fine there. Run clean flow, that's fine there.
The smaller the shape, the more, okay.
So here's the key message.
Okay, cone fit. The smaller the shape, the more passively the cone needs to go to length. So this was, a 2002, and it was 23 or so, and this is a 2006 cone. So we can actually sometimes get a little bit larger cone in because there's natural shape in the canal. So I'm actually going to pick up another one, and I'm going to try to not crinkle it. I'm just going to see how easily it goes to 23 or so, right on the ML, Vanessa? Good. And it's still crinkled a little bit on there. So I'm actually going to cut one back.
So gutta percha cones are a problem. This section's for you, Dale. The ML09 cones are supposedly laser inspected, and I'm using the non-standard cones. The 14, I'm sorry, the white, the extra fine kind of fits a 14 shape. I hardly ever use it anymore because working at that shape is just so painful. I normally am at a 17 or a 20, which is going to be the yellow cone. And occasionally, just the natural shape that you have in the canal, even though you only took a 17 file to full tone, oftentimes, because of the natural shape in the canal, a 20 cone will fit. So I'm going to fit the biggest cone in terms of the taper and so reduce the amount of sealer that's in the tooth. So we're going to fit these cones in the tooth, and we're going to actually pick them. So they're supposed to be laser inspected. These are all supposed to be the same size. These are all supposed to be the same size. And if we look at them, they're not. I mean, we got this tiny guy here and chubby over here. Got kind of another chubby one, a medium one. And on these are all the yellow fine cones here. And on the red, the medium fine cones, look at the difference in the size of these. We got medium fine cones. It's a bigger cone. That's the red cone with tip sizes smaller than the yellow cone. So they're all over the map. So I'll pull out a pile of these cones. This is the nemesis right now. Even working at a 17 and a 20-ish is cone fit. I'll just pull out a stack of cones. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, the MB was kind of a tight 17. I had to kind of work to get that 17 to get down there. And maybe the ML, the 17 went down easily. So it's going to be kind of maybe a bigger cone. So I'm going to pick the cone size, looking at those tips of the cones in the microscope to kind of best guess what that is, and then put that in the canal and see if it goes to the length. And the take home for this in terms of cone fit is the smaller your shapes and size, the more important it is that that cone goes easily to length. When you're working at an F1, we were all used to fitting cones a quarter back, maybe even a half back if you're like at an F1. If you're at a quarter back or a half back at a 17, you put sealer in there, you're going to be a millimeter short or more. So those cones need to go pretty passively to length. So this is, again, the tips and tricks part of doing this for 15 plus years now.
This cone now, I've trimmed about a millimeter off the tip.
So I cut that ML cone
to length still, and no crinkle on that one. So that's good. So I'm going to mark that at 23. So here's the MB, same size cone. And I trimmed a millimeter off, and that's going to 22, so it's really only like 21. So whatever the natural shape, because we didn't really impart much natural shape in the canal, whatever the natural shape was in this canal, it's not taking that larger cone, so we're going to have to drop back down to a 17.
Does everybody see what just happened there? So I took 17s to full tone on both the MB and the ML. The ML cone, it only had a 17. I picked a 2006 cone, the medium fine cone, the red cone, and it was actually overextending and crinkling the tip, and I had to cut it. So the ML canal, the biggest file it saw to full length was a 1702, actually took a 2006 cone because of the natural shape and size in that canal. We didn't put that shape in there, that was there naturally. So you end up having to sort through the cones and sometimes trim some cones, which we're all used to doing, to get them to fit. Because you're kind of fitting the cone at these smaller sizes. You're kind of fitting the cone to some degree to the natural shape that was in the canal. Make sense?
Okay, I've got a 17 cone. MB is 23 millimeters. And that goes easily to 23.
Done. All right, so We wanted to do obturation, and I didn't get obturation on this case. So I pulled in a case from a different patient that shows how we're obturating these smaller shapes and sizes now. So this is a switch of a case here.
It's actually
Should be that bad.
astonishingly nice
Yeah,
in
it should be that
Arizona
bad.
at this time.
Yeah, July into July.
So I'll just put the BC sealer in until I can see it.
So this is a nice thing that you see a lot with gentle wave is when the canals are confluent.
Coming up the other canal, and we're good to go on that. So MB cone. Bang to 21. And we will top up the sealer because sometimes there's a bubble that comes up or gets caught in there as it fills from the bottom, and it doesn't fill all the way to the apex on the other canal. And I'm not expecting this cone to go to length. I'm expecting it to hit, and it does. And this is just a sear off, not a down pack. And sometimes a pull out. Cones don't fit with this particular technique as well.
So what's the problem? The cones fall out. So I stopped down packing with a System B.
It's actually
Should be that bad.
so I dropped another cone in there, and there we go, clean sear off.
So we're going to do a combined down pack backfill. I'm going to use the Obtura or Calamus, whatever you have. That's going to be my plucker. And you're going to use the smallest one that you have. The tip of that needs to fit in the orifice, so you're not going to get much in the way of hydraulics. And that's actually a little bit of a struggle sometimes. So here I come with the Obtura.
Okay, the combined down pack backfill, I'm going to squeeze out some gutta percha to get that tip good and hot. And we're going to drop that in the ML. And this is our plugger. This is our down pack.
You can see I'm wiggling a little bit. Put a little pressure on it.
I can actually see a little sealer coming up, and then squeeze, and I saw it just shoot up the MB. So that's good. And into the MB, which is a little harder to see because the sealer came up. There we go. I can feel it sink down in there a little bit, and we can see it sink down. That was our down pack, and our backfill, and the distal.
So there's our completed case. That wasn't the case I just obturated. That was the one that we instrumented. So 3 gentle waves in a row from last Thursday. Cases Q&A, Wendy?
So people want to know just the RPMs that you like to use on your files.
Slow, 100, 150. The first case, remember earlier we said it was 2.5 minutes of rotary file use on that case where the files basically fell down the canal. If you want to double your RPM, that's fine, but really how much time are you saving? In my mind, the time savings isn't worth the increased risk of breakage. So I'm using 100 to 150 RPM. So the question is, what about torque? I'm using an air-driven handpiece, so the torque meter is in my ear. We call it oral feedback, AU, oral.
John, what sealer are you using in your cases?
Oh my goodness, I've forgotten now. So we started with the Buchanan labeled the red Brasler BCS. We changed to Angelus, and it's a single part BC sealer system. You can't use a 2-part because you just can't deliver it.
On that last case, a question came in. So if the natural canal is larger than the file that you use, doesn't that mean that you actually did not touch all the canal's walls? Why would you not go to a file larger so you make contact there?
So the whole point about you have to touch the canal walls with your file to clean them is a question that comes out of what I would call endodontics 1.0, which is clean shape pack endodontics. We don't want to touch the files. I'll have cases where I can tell natively, just looking at the tooth, it's a 25, that's a cariously exposed tooth where we actually don't use files at all. I get length, run gentle wave, and the idea that you need to touch all the canal walls, that you need to cut dentin to clean the tooth, that's a question of endodontics 1.0. We're doing endodontics about 2.5 now, on our way to endodontics 3.0, which is completely non-instrumentation endodontics. So the purpose of the file now, the real purpose of the file now, the way that I'm using it, and I've used it in these 3 cases, is to make sure I can get a cone to fit. That's it. If I can get a 17 file all the way down, I know I can get a cone down. And if you look at this case very closely, actually, you'll see in the TDO sheet, the distal canal actually is listed in an F1. So the largest file I stuck in that canal, that distal canal, that's clearly bigger than a 17 file. I stuck a 17 file in there, but I could not get the cone to go down and go around that corner. So I actually had to pick up an old school, old nickel titanium instrument, hand bend it and get it around that to where I could actually get the cone to fit. So the purpose of the file now is no longer to scrape the canal walls or touch the canal walls. The purpose of the file, in my mind, is to make sure I can get a cone to fit. And the next question is, why do you need a cone to fit? Well, you want to do something that looks like you did a root canal. Still.
This is 2 questions. One, in young patients with large vital pulps, do you still use these small files?
So the answer is yes, I still use these files, but I'm going to get a lot of the coronal pulp out first with files, and I might use something like that 1004 or 1006, that file that I used to create a little bit more funneling on that one case where I was having trouble getting the files in. I might use that, or you could use a barred broach or a small Gates Glidden to get out the bulk of the coronal pulp. In my mind, it doesn't make sense to ask the gentle wave to spend the 5 minutes of bleach that we have on digesting the coronal pulp and then not get to the apical pulp. So I'm going to get as much of the pulp out with files, in that case, files as I can, so that I can ask gentle wave to get the pieces of the pulp out that I couldn't get to with the files. So yes, we're going to use larger files on those, but primarily to rip out the coronal pulp.
Have you had any issues doing one step with patients with SIP-SAP?
SIP-SAP.
Symptomatic irreversible pulpitis, symptomatic apical periodontitis.
Oh, yes. So by and large, the only cases that are coming back, by and large, and I get a lot of necrotic cases, are cases with long-standing sinus tracts. I get a lot of necrotic cases. I don't get a ton of pulpitis cases, SIP cases. We do get some of those cases. Still, even those case types as a group, they tend to be just fine. So I'm not having issues with those. But we're going with files to a 17 to full tone. I think some of those issues might be that people are afraid to take their files to full tone on a pulpitic case. And I think that might be the case. That it might be even more important to get your file to full tone and get that pulp that's the big chunks of pulp that are in the canal out.
Are you using any orifice openers?
So we used on the second case that was a little bit calcified, and we had trouble getting in there because it was pulp stone. So I used the endoguide burr to funnel, and that's a little bit of an orifice opener-ish, but I don't think of orifice opening in the same way. It's the same word, but I don't think of it in the same way that most endodontists do. So I used the endoguides, and then I was still having trouble getting the files in, and that's when I came back with the FlowLogic 1004 or 1006. I don't remember which one it was. In that video a little bit back, the second case, and you could see I was actually pushing on it and I was brushing it against the sidewall. So in my mind, that was kind of an orifice opener. I have SXs and those kinds of things, and I think the FlowLogic Access line has those instruments, and I'm fine with those too. But for me, they're funneling instruments to make it easier for me to get these very small rotors in, because you just don't have tactile feedback with those.
Sure. Couple of questions here on you're going to corrected working length. And in our IFUs, we talk about staying 1 millimeter short.
Oh, well. These files are so small, and I think that's a holdover, Kevin.
Yeah, that's a
from
holdover
the Molar
from the
PI
past.
days.
Yep.
And I think that was half holdover from the Molar PI days and half holdover because people were taking F2s to full tone and then running gentle wave. These files are so small then I'll take them to full tone and even past. You saw that. I'm not worried about it. They're so small.
Are you using 5% in your cases?
Yeah, so all of us that were in the 5% trial, I don't know anybody that's not using 5% that was on the beta team. We're all using 5%. I can't see any reason why I would drop it down.
I think data-wise right now is showing like 60 to 70% of the field is using 5%. Yeah.
So now's a good time if people want to come off camera or not, or come off mute and ask John any questions, and then open it up to the live audience too.
Yeah, I still have a lot of problem cases that come up. And when I switched to GentleWave, I've never really mastered small shapes. So I can't say that I've really gotten there. But I just had so many problem cases come back. I see how good GentleWave works, but I feel like I changed so many things. So I kind of had to just pull back on that and go back to 2-visit, and I just don't use bioceramics at all because I'm just seeing signs that I felt like I never saw before, but I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's 1 visit. So I don't know if you ever went through that. I want to know if you just saw, if you changed a lot of things, because it's very different than what we've advocated for years. With that being said, when you have a 1 visit and then you have persistent symptoms, I don't mind a flare up. I know what that is, but persistent symptoms where it's not getting better, what do? I have this discomfort that I face often. And then I see failures come back a few years later. They healed really quick. It worked great. It was wonderful, at the time. And then a few years later, it just doesn't make sense why it's failing. And then I'll go back in and retreat it and I can get it to heal with calcium hydroxide. Not that I think it's a miracle pace. So I'll leave it at that. I love your feedback on that.
And this is a perfect segue into the clinical study. So
do we have time to do a little bit on this to answer that question?
Yes, I think it's an important thing to answer, yes.
So the first part sounded much more like a statement. The second part sounded more like a question about what do you do? Part of the outcome of single visit treatment is availability of multi-visit treatment when there's failure. Okay, so it's part of the initial treatment algorithm. You remember Roger Lewis lecturing on this all those years ago, is that's an available arm. So if you're small and single visit and it works, yeah, everybody's happy. If you're small and single visit and it doesn't work, multi-visit treatment is an available arm. And so it has, where are you going to set your decision threshold? So am I single visit everything? Absolutely not. No, I'm not. Retreatments are almost always multi-visit now. I may run GentleWave if I can't get down the MB2 or something like that, and I still may do multi-visit on that case, and I may follow the case for radiographic evidence of resolution of AP and symptom resolution at 3 and 4 months. So multi-visit is still in my armamentarium. And you're going to have some single visit failures, and I have them too. Most of my single visit failures, and that's what we found in this trial, and Kevin actually called me on this. Again, it's part of the case spectrum that I have is I don't get a lot of vital cases. I get mostly necrotic cases. My failures in the trial were all necrotic with sinus tracts. All of them were. We didn't have any, shall we say, symptomatic failures. But again, I'm not seeing that case type, so my base rate of those cases is lower. So I'm going to say, make sure that you're getting instruments to full tone, especially on vital cases, but you're still going to want to get the bulk of the pulp out with your files. And in my eyes, that means taking a file to full tone. And if it's comfortable for you, take a 17 or maybe even 20 O2. They're so small to full tone, and then run GentleWave. And I'm not having very many problems with those. I can think of one symptomatic retreatment case that I've got in process right now. It doesn't happen often. And there was a whole host of issues with like nothing's working on this lady, which is of course why she's in our office. So multi-visit and single visit, small. If it's working, great. If it's not, you can always go to multi-visit. I wouldn't talk you out of 2 visits, but I think GentleWave can be very useful for a lot of cases. Your bread and butter, like these 3 cases, is dead molar through a crown. I don't even think about those anymore. Mike Trudeau and I are working on a new decision-making algorithm, loosely called advanced irrigation, about where should you do single visit, where should you do multi-visit. those kinds of things, those decisions. I think we need to revisit that in the age of advanced irrigation now. Steve, what's your typical file size before you run a cycle?
I mean, I usually just take it to an F1 on a pro taper shape.
To full tone?
Yeah.
Yeah. The trial data says you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
So most of my trial cases were a protocol violation because I was supposed to be at a 2006 or bigger, and I was almost never at a 2006. I was smaller than that. And I was not supposed to go to tone, and I went to full tone on those two. So out of those, we'll skip way ahead on that, because as I think Kevin said, this is a good segue. So here's what the spectrum of those looked like. This is what the cases that we enrolled in the trial. This is 2 years of follow-up. So we had radiographic findings in most of the cases and no radiographic findings in a handful of them. And let me jump ahead again. And here's what it looked like in terms of our outcomes. And this is at 2 years now. So we eventually had 10 that were lost to follow-up. But what you can see is everybody that we lost to follow-up was either improved or within normal limits. So this band right here of these 25, these patients right here fed into that 4 that were lost and moved, but they were already within normal limits. And we had 2 other cases that had persistent sinus tracts that did resolve with revision on those cases. But that doesn't paint the whole picture, and I'm going to skip Rogers a little bit on that as well. Here's what it looked like over time in terms of lost to follow up. And then here's actually what it looks like when you do what's called a multiple imputation on the data. I'll go down a little bit farther on the trial data. Over the time periods we observed 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and 1 year. And when you take into account the uncertainty in the patients that we had lost to follow-up, and you correct for that mathematically using a technique called multiple imputation, what you find is under strict criteria, about 83% of the cases were within normal limits, and with loose criteria which would mean within normal limits or improving, we had over 95% of the cases, and none of the cases were symptomatic. So the trial data, in my mind, that's what really said 1 visit. Or I can identify a case preoperatively that's at elevated risk of having a problem and maybe isn't a surgical candidate. I might do multi-visit on that, but the routine cases are the ones that I showed you from last Thursday. Dead molar through a crown, 1 visit. Dead molar through a crown, 1 visit. Done. Yeah. Wendy, were there other questions? Oh, Karen's
sure.
got one.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Have you thought about doing the same status cases? I know you said you don't have as many of those cases, but it would be good to see the contrast.
So there are pulpitis cases in there. Most of the cases were necrotic, and I skewed it that way for a variety of reasons, but all of the vital cases were fine. And so that was one of the things we looked for is, did we have a vital case that developed radiographic findings? And the answer was no. And none of the vital cases were symptomatic either. So
John, by full tone, do you mean 1 red bar?
Yes. Yeah. So depending on your apex locator, the bulk of them, you're getting closer and the beep gets faster and faster. Then you get tone and then you go past. And so full tone. Yeah. Beep, 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 beep. Then you're there all the way down. Because that's actually the only really reliable indicators when that file is touching the periapical tissues. We all know as endodontists that, when it says a 0.5 millimeter short, it's like, yeah, a 0.5 to 5, who knows, especially on a retreatment case. So full tone, which is actually out the apex 1/4 to a 0.5 millimeter, best evidence.
I'm going to open it up again to everyone to come off mute, ask some questions. This is when it always gets the most interesting, so don't be shy.
The FlowLogic files. So Kevin came out. I can't tell you how mean we were to these files. We're using them in multiple. I'm going to answer your question, but I have to tell the story first. I can't tell you how mean we were to these files. I'm trying to break them. I'm really trying to break them in a dry tooth, and nothing's happening. Finally, we have to grab the tip with a hemostat, and the motor's like almost stalling out. I finally broke my first one either last week or the week before on a retreatment case where I'm spinning it at thousands of RPMs, melting out the gutta percha, and I'm pushing on it in the tooth. And of course, it broke off in the gutta percha, so it was really easy to bypass. It was, no, this was actually, it was a straight taper FlowLogic Assert or Agile, one of those two straight tapers, like a 10 or a 20. It was a fairly small file, an F1 shaped file.
Probably like a 20
pushing on it.
Yeah, probably
pushing on it. Not after he came out.
I mean, honestly,
I can't tell you how tough they are.
We were nervous. It's insane. I mean, I think when we first started, it was like, oh, is this going to be all right? But then he started really abusing them. And then when I left there, it was like, oh, all right, these are
stunned how tough they are. So I took a look at when he brought these 1002s. I'm like, oh, this is going to end badly. Because we're all used to that. And there's some magic about, and you guys all know I was an SS White guy for 15, 20 years. There's some magic in SS White's treatment, and the FlowLogic files have even a better heat treatment. There's something about that heat treatment that makes them, they don't unwind even. They're really hard to break. You can break them. I mean, I broke one, but I'm like really wrenching on this thing.
That is the one thing that is, right, you look at the flute design, you're going to be like, whatever. But the one thing that is unique is their treatment. They're very careful with sharing what that is. So we're really happy with rapid heat treatment.
Yeah. Have you used SS White files? Yeah. I mean, the heat treatment on them is like, so it was a big, their heat treatment was head and shoulders above. This is even better heat treatment. There's something about it that I don't know. But yeah, I was nervous when they first brought them out. Not anymore. 10 hand file down, pick that up, go. Yeah.
John, are you autoclaving them and reusing them at all?
Files?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. No, and I've never been a file reuse guy. Never have been.
John, do you have any file changes when you are right on top of the mandibular canal? And do you have any concern about sealer puffs?
So do I have concerns about sealer puffs when you're on top of the IAN? And I think everybody does, and I think that's independent of file design. So I used to be more worried with molar. I'm not worried at all with clean flow, zero. So I'll still take the files to full tone, and I'm going to place sealer carefully, and I'm going to put the cone in very slowly as well to minimize the amount of extruded sealer. And that's actually one of the trickier parts with small and ultra small is managing the extruded sealer. So I just happened to get lucky with the cases that I showed you that there wasn't a gallon of sealer out on one of those, but that happens sometimes. I'm going to do my normal instrumentation, my normal clean flow protocol. I'm going to place the sealer, but I'm going to put the cone in extremely slowly to try to minimize extruded sealer. But I do that on any case.
I noticed you do not coat the cone with sealer.
No, you could, I guess, try doing that, but the cones are so small. Maybe if someone can figure out how to do that, I put the sealer in the canal.
Another question. Do you ever do patency between your files? I have noticed you haven't done it. Well, yours are 0.2. I use 0.4 taper, and I found that they kind of pack debris apically, and I always have to go through that apical portion to break through that packed dentin.
So the question was, do I do patency checks when I'm using rotary files? And the answer is sometimes, and it depends. Do I feel like I have an increased chance of getting blocked out? Yeah, I'm going to do patency checks. But also, I'm using files that are around the size of hand files now, the 1002. And so maybe I'll go, so the 10 goes and the 15 doesn't go, and the 15 kind of doesn't want to go. So I'll pick up the 1002 and I'll use that rotary file as my patency file check. That goes, we're done. I'm back to the 15. If that doesn't go, now the pucker, and then I need to pick up the 10 hand file and try to figure out what happened. So I'm using patency files when I think something might be going sideways into check, but I'm going to use a rotary patency file first because it's right there. And that's actually what I want, is I want that rotary patency path, hence starting with the 10 hand file, then the 1002, which is about the same size, it's a little bigger, and then the 15 and 20. And those are taken to patency as well. So I'm not instrumenting short. I'm not doing any kind of step back with those files like we used to do. They're all going to length because they're so small.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
Why do you decided to use air-driven motor instead of electric motor?
Why did I decide to use air-driven instead of electric? It's because when Ben Johnson had me out to his house in 1993 and gave me the first set of rotaries, there was no electric handpiece. And I cut my teeth on air, and I just have not changed. I wouldn't talk anybody out of electric. I'm old. Yeah.
Thank you so
back
much,
to you guys now.
Wendy, for moderating for us. We're just going to end on a couple of slides here so you guys can know what's up and coming, and then we'll call it an evening. Well, I just wanted to thank both Dr. Khademi and Kevin once again for this evening's lecture. And thank you to everyone for, allowing us to try something new. I hope that the people at home enjoyed it. I hope the people here live in the audience enjoyed it. I think it was really fun to be a part of this. I did want to go over our upcoming events, but mark your calendar. We're going to have our next webinar on March 18th with Dr. Kirk Corey and Peter Hom. This is really great for those who may have just integrated Gentle Wave into their practice or is thinking about integrating Gentle Wave into their practice. It's going to be navigating new tech adoption, the fast tracking of your learning curve. So mark your calendar for that one. We also do have in-person workshops that we do in fun cities all over the country. We have one happening actually this weekend in Salt Lake City with Dr. Kirk Corey and Ryan Facer. And we're also going to be out in Fort Lauderdale with Drs. Matthew Miller and Markley Masani. So as Dr. Khademi talked about today, we are so excited. We have launched Flow Logic files designed around a refined role of the file, especially when used with the Gentle Wave system. Rather than focusing on cleaning, Flow Logic is intended to help establish or restore an uninterrupted flow path, allowing the system to complete the clean. Early feedback, as we heard from Dr. Khademi, it's very encouraging, especially around preservation, efficiency, and how naturally Flow Logic fits into the existing Gentle Wave workflow. If you'd like to explore Flow Logic firsthand, you can request complimentary samples by checking the Flow Logic box on the CE survey that you'll receive after tonight's live stream. Thank you so much for attending, and good evening. Good night.